kings, farmers, and towns, early states and economies, circa 600 BCE to 600 CE. There were several developments in different parts of the subcontinent during the long span of 1500 years following the end of the Harappan civilization. This was also the period during which the Rig Veda was composed by people living along the Indus and its tributaries. Agricultural settlement emerged in many parts of the subcontinent, including North India, the Deccan Plateau, and parts of Karnataka. Besides, there is evidence of pastoral populations in the Deccan and further south. New modes of disposal of the dead, including the making of elaborate stone structures known as megaliths, emerged in central and south India from the first millennium BCE. In many cases, the dead were buried with a rich range of iron tools and weapons. Okay, this is an inscription. Okay, Sanji, found at Sanji, Madhya Pradesh, circa 2nd century BCE. Okay. From circa 6th century BCE, there is evidence that there were other trends as well. Perhaps the most visible was the emergence of early states, empires, and kingdoms. Underlying these political processes were other changes evident in the ways in which agricultural production was organized. Simultaneously, new towns appeared almost throughout the subcontinent. Historians attempt to understand these developments by drawing on a range of sources: inscriptions, texts, coins, and visual material. As we will see, this is a complex process. You will also notice that these sources do not tell the entire story. Epigraphy is the study of inscriptions. Epigraphy is the study of inscriptions. Princeps and Piyadasi. Some of the most momentous developments in Indian epigraph took place in the 1830s. This was when the James Princeps, an officer in the Mint of East India Company, deciphered Brahmi and Kharoshthi. Okay, this was when James Princeps, an officer in the Mint of the East India Company, deciphered Brahmi and Kharoshthi, two scripts found used in the earliest inscriptions and coins. He found that most of these mentioned a king referred to as Piyadasi, meaning pleasant to behold. There were a few inscriptions which also referred to the king as Ashoka, one of the most famous rulers known from Buddhist texts. This gave a new direction to investigations into early Indian political history, as European and Indian scholars used inscriptions and texts composed in a variety of languages to reconstruct the lineages of major dynasties that had ruled the subcontinent. As a result, the broad contours of political history were in place by the early decades of the 20th century. Subsequently, scholars began to shift their focus to the context of political history, investigating whether there were connections between political changes and economic and social developments. It was soon realized that while there were links, these were not always simple or direct. The earliest states, the 16 Mahajanapadas, the 6th century BCE, is often regarded as the major turning point in early Indian history. It is an era associated with early states, cities, the growing use of iron, the development of coinage, etc. It also witnessed the growth of diverse systems of thought, including Buddhism and Jainism. Early Buddhist and Jaina texts mention, amongst other things, 16 states known as Mahajanapadas. Although the list varies, some names such as Vajji, Magadha, Koshala, Kuru, Panjala, Gandhara, and Avanti occur frequently. Clearly, these were amongst the most important Mahajanapadas. While most Mahajanapadas were ruled by kings, some, known as Ganas or Sanghas, were oligarchies, where power was shared by a number of men, often collectively called Rajas. Both Mahavira and Buddha belonged to such Ganas. In some instances, as in the case of Vajji Sangha, the Rajas probably controlled resources such as land collectively, although their histories are often difficult to reconstruct due to the lack of sources. Some of these states lasted for nearly a thousand years. Each Mahajanapada had a capital city, which was often fortified. Maintaining these fortified cities as well as providing for incipient armies and bureaucracies required resources. From 6th century, circa 6th century BCE onwards, Brahmanas began composing Sanskrit texts known as Dharma Sutras. These laid down norms for rulers as well as for other social categories who were ideally expected to be Kshatriyas. Rulers were advised to collect taxes and tribute from cultivators, traders, and artisans. Were resources also procured from pastoralists and forest people? Okay, we do not really know. What we do know is that raids on neighboring states were recognized as a legitimate means of acquiring wealth. Gradually, some states acquired standing armies and maintained regular bureaucracies. Others continue to depend on militia recruited more often than not from the peasantry. Okay. Inscriptions. Inscriptions are writings engraved on hard surfaces such as stone, metal, or pottery. They usually record the achievements, activities, or ideas of those who commissioned them and include the exploits of kings or donations made by men, women, and men to religious institutions. Inscriptions are virtually permanent records, some of which carry dates. Others are dated on the basis of paleography or style of writing with a fair amount of precision. For instance, in circa 250 BCE, the letter A was written like this. Okay. By circa 500 CE, it was written like this. Okay. The earliest inscriptions were in Prakrit, a name for languages used by ordinary people. Names of rulers such as Ajatashatru and Ashoka, known from Prakrit texts and inscriptions, have been spelled in their Prakrit forms in this chapter. You will also find terms in languages such as Pali, Tamil, and Sanskrit, which too were used to write inscriptions and texts. It is possible that people spoke in other languages as well, even though these were not used for writing. Okay, Janapada means the land where a Jana, a people, clan, or tribe, sets its foot or settles. It is a word used in both Prakrit and Sanskrit. Okay, here you can see the early states and their capital. Okay, Gandhara, Taxila, Cambodia, Pushkalavadi, okay, Ashmaga, Ujjaini, Avanti Ujjaini, Kaushambi, Valsa, Varanasi, Kashi, Kosala, Shravasti, Malla, Kushinagara, Vajji or Vrijji, Vaishali, Magadha, Rajgir, Vanga, Chamba, Anga, Malsya, Mathura, Shurasena, Kuru, Panjala, Indraprastha, Achichatra. Okay. Oligarchy refers to a form of government where power is exercised by a group of men. The Roman Republic, about which you read last year, was an oligarchy in spite of its name. So, example of oligarchy government is Roman Republic. Okay, first amongst 16, Magadha. The Magadha, the 6th and 4th century BCE, Magadha, between 6th and 4th century BCE, Magadha in present-day Bihar became the most powerful Mahajanapada. Modern historians explain this development in a variety of ways. Magadha was a region where agriculturalists was especially productive. Besides, iron mines in present-day Jharkhand were accessible and provided resources for tools and weapons. Elephants, an important component of the army, were found in forests in the region. Also, the Ganga and its tributaries provided a means of cheap and convenient communication. However, early Buddhist and Jaina writers who wrote about Magadha attributed to its power to the policies of individuals. Ruthlessly ambitious kings of whom Bimbisara, Ajatasattu, and Mahapadmananda are the best known, and their ministers who helped implement their policies. Initially, Rajagaha, the Prakrit name for present Rajgir in Bihar, was the capital of Magadha. Interestingly, the old name means the house of king. Rajagaha was a fortified settlement located amongst hills. Later in the 4th century BCE, the Capital was shifted to Patliputra, present-day Patna, commanding routes of communication along the Ganga. Okay, here you can see a picture of fortification walls at Rajgir. Okay, languages and scripts. Most Ashokan inscriptions were written in Prakrit language, while those in northwest in this subcontinent were in Aramic and Greek. Most Prakrit inscriptions were written in Brahmi script. However, some in the northwest were written in Kharoshti. The Aramic and Greek scripts were used for the inscriptions in Afghanistan. Okay, here you can see the lion capital. Okay, here you can see a bull. Okay, an early empire. The growth of Magadha culminated in the emergence of the Mauryan Empire. Chandragupta Maurya, who founded the empire, circa 321, 321 BCE, extended control as far northwest as Afghanistan and Balochistan. And his grandson Ashoka, arguably the most famous ruler of early India, conquered Kalinga, present-day coastal Orissa. Finding out about the Mauryas. Historians have used a variety of sources to reconstruct the history of Mauryan Empire. These include archaeological finds, especially sculpture. Also valuable are contemporary works such as the account of Megasthenes, a Greek ambassador to the court of Chandragupta Maurya. So Megasthenes arrived in India during the period of Chandragupta Maurya. Okay, which survives in fragments. Another source that is often used is the Arthashastra, parts of which were probably composed by Kautilya or Chanakya, traditionally believed to be the minister of Chandragupta Maurya. Besides, the Mauryas are mentioned in later Buddhist, Jaina and Puranic literature, as well as in Sanskrit literary works. While these are useful, the inscriptions of Ashoka, circa 272 or 268 to 231 BCE, on rocks and pillars, are often regarded as amongst the most valuable sources. Ashoka was the first ruler who inscribed his messages to his subjects and officials on stone surfaces, natural rocks, as well as polished pillars. He used the inscriptions to proclaim what he understood to be dharma. This included respect towards elders, generosity towards brahmanas and those who renounced worldly life, treating slaves and servants kindly, and respect for religions and traditions other than one's own. Administering the empire, there were five major political centers in the empire: the capital Patliputra and provincial centers of Taxila, Ujjaini, Tosali, and Suvarnagiri, all mentioned in Ashoka inscriptions. If we examine the content of these inscriptions, we find virtually the same message engraved everywhere, from the present day northwest frontier province of Pakistan to Andhra Pradesh, Orissa, and Uttarakhand in India. Could this vast empire have had a uniform administrative system? Historians have increasingly come to realize that this is unlikely. The regions included within the empire were just too diverse. Imagine the contrast between the hilly terrain of Afghanistan and the coast of Orissa. It is likely that administrative control was strongest in areas around the capital and the provincial centers. These centers were carefully chosen, both Taxila and Ujjaini, being situated on important long distance trade routes, while Suvarnagiri, literally the golden mountain, was possibly important for and taping the gold mines of Karnataka. Okay, here you can see the distribution of Ashokan inscriptions. Okay, major rock edicts is depicted as a red triangle. Minor rock edicts is depicted as a violet square, and pillar inscriptions are depicted as a circle. So first we can look into the major rock edicts, which are Mansehra, Shahbaz Garhi, Kandahar, Kalsi, Shishupalgarh, Jaugada, Girnar, Sopara, Sannadi. Okay, next minor Rocadics. Minor Rocadics are Maski, Gavimad, Palki-Gundu, Jadinga Rameshwar, Siddhapur, Brahmagiri, Nittur, Rajula Mandagiri, Udegolam, Babru, Bhairath, Bahapur. Okay. Next one is pillar inscriptions. Pillar inscriptions are Topra, Meerut, Nigali Sagar, Ruminde, Rampurva, Lauria Nandangar, Lauria Araraj, Sarnath, Gujara, Kaushambi, Ahraura, Sahasram, Lauria Araraj, Lauria Nandangar, Rampurva. Okay, this is Bay of Bengal, and here is the right side of India is Bay of Bengal, and left side is Arabian Sea. Okay, what the king's officials did. Here is an excerpt from the account of Megasthenes. Of the great officers of state, some superintend the rivers, measure the land as is done in Egypt, and inspect the sluices by which water is let out from the main canals into their branches, so that everyone may have an equal supply of it. The same persons have charge also of the huntsman, and are entrusted with the power of rewarding or punishing them according to their deserts. They collect the taxes and superintend the occupations connected with land, as those of the woodcutters, the carpenters, blacksmiths, and the miners. Communication along both land and riverine roads was vital for the existence and of the empire. Journeys from the center to the provinces could have taken weeks, if not months. This meant arranging for provisions as well as protection for those who were on the move. It is obvious that the army was an important means for ensuring the latter. Megasthenes mentioned a committee with six subcommittees for coordinating military activity. Of these, one looked after the navy, the second managed transport and provisions, the third was responsible for foot soldiers, and fourth for horses, fifth for chariots, and sixth for elephants. The activities of the second subcommittee were rather varied, arranging for bullock carts to carry equipment, procuring food for soldiers and fodder for animals, and recruiting servants and artisans to look after the soldiers. Ashoka also tried to hold his empire together by propagating Dhamma, the principle of which, as we have seen, were simple and virtually universally applicable. This, according to him, would ensure the well-being of people in this world and the next. Special officers known as Dhamma Mahamatta were appointed to spread the message of Dhamma. How important was the empire? When historians began reconstructing early Indian history in the 19th century, the emergence of the Maurya Empire was regarded as a major landmark. India was then under colonial rule and was part of the British Empire. 19th and early 20th century Indian historians found the possibility that there was an empire in early India, both challenging and exciting. Also, some of the archaeological finds associated with the Mauryas, including stone sculpture, were considered to be example of the spectacular art typical of empires. Many of these historians found the message on Ashokan inscriptions very different from that of most other rulers, suggesting that Ashoka was more powerful and industrious, as also more humble than later rulers who adopted grandiose titles. So it is not surprising that nationalist leaders in the 20th century regarded him as an inspiring figure. Okay. Yet, how important was the Mauryan Empire? It lasted for about 150 years, which is not very long time in the vast span of the history of subcontinent. Besides, if you look at the map too, you will notice the empire did not encompass the entire subcontinent, and even within the frontiers of the empire, control was not uniform. By the second century BCE, new chiefdoms and kingdoms emerged in several parts of the subcontinent. New notions of kingship. New notions of kingship. First one is chiefs and kings in the south. The new kingdoms that emerged in the Deccan and further south, including the chiefdoms of Cholas, Cheras, and Pandyas in Tamilagam, the name of ancient Tamil country, which included parts of present-day Andhra Pradesh and Kerala, in addition to Tamil Nadu, proved to be scale and prosperous. Okay, capturing elephants for the army. The Arthashastra lays down minute details of administrative and military organization. This is what it says about how to capture elephants. Guards of elephant forests, assisted by those who rear elephants, those who enchain the legs of elephants, those who guard the boundaries, those who live in forests, as well as by those who nurse elephants, shall, with the help of 5 or 7 female elephants, to help in tethering wild ones, trace the whereabouts of herds of elephants by following the course of urine and dung left by elephants. According to Greek sources, the Mauryan ruler had a standing army of 6 lakh foot soldiers, 30,000 cavalry, and 9,000 elephants. Some historians consider these accounts to be exaggerated. Okay. We know about chiefs and chiefdoms. A chief is a powerful man whose position may or may not be hereditary. Okay. He derives support from his kinfolk. His functions may include performing special rituals, leadership in warfare, and arbitrating disputes. He receives gifts from his subordinates, unlike kings who usually collect taxes, and often distributes these amongst his supporters. Generally, there are no regular armies and officials in chiefdoms. Okay. We know about these states from a variety of sources. For instance, the early Tamil Sangam texts contain poems describing chiefs and the ways in which they acquired and distributed resources. Many chiefs and kings, including the Chadavahanas, who ruled over parts of western and central India, circa 2nd century BCE to 2nd century CE, and the Shagas, a people of Central Asian origin who established kingdoms in the northwestern and western part of the subcontinent, derived revenues from long distance trade. Their social origins were often obscure, but we will see in the case of Shadavahanas in chapter 3. Okay, once they acquired power, they attempted to claim social status in a variety of ways. Okay, divine kings. One means of claiming high status was to identify with a variety of deities. This strategy is best exemplified by Kushanas, circa 1st century BCE to 1st century CE, who ruled over a vast kingdom extending from Central Asia to Northwest India. Central Asia to Northwest India. Their history has been reconstructed from inscriptions and textual traditions. The notions of kingship they wish to project are perhaps best evidenced in their coins and sculpture. Colossal statues of Kushana rulers have been found installed in a shrine at Mud near Madura, Uttar Pradesh. Similar statues have been found in a shrine of Afghanistan as well. Some historians feel this indicates that Kushanas considered themselves godlike. Many Kushan rulers also adopted the title Devaputra or son of God, possibly inspired by Chinese rulers who called themselves son of heaven. By the 4th century, there is evidence of larger states, including Gupta Empire. Many of these depended on Samandas, men who maintained themselves through local resources, including control over land. They offered homage and provided military support to rulers. Powerful Samandas could become kings. Conversely, weak rulers might find themselves being reduced to positions of subordination. Historians of the Gupta rulers have been reconstructed from literature, coins, and inscriptions, including prashastis composed in praise of kings in particular and patrons in general by poets. While historians often attempt to draw factual information from such compositions, those who've composed and read them often treasured them as works of poetry rather than as accounts that were literally true. The Prayaga Prashasti, also known as Allahabad Pillar Inscription, Prayaga Prashasti or Allahabad Pillar Inscription, composed in Sanskrit by Harish Sena, the court poet of Samudragupta, arguably the most powerful of the Gupta rulers, circa 4th century CE in a case in point. Okay. Here you can see the a Kushana coin, upwards King Kanishka, reverse a deity. Here is King Kanishka and here is a deity. Okay. The Pandya chief Sengutuvan visits the forest. Who is the Pandya chief? Sengutuvan. Yeah, this is an excerpt from the Silapadigaram, a epic written in Tamil. Okay, when he visited the forest, people came down the mountain singing and dancing, just as the defeated show respect to the victorious king. So did they bring king's ivory? So did they bring gifts, ivory, fragrant wood, fans made of the hair of deer, honey, sandalwood, red ochre, antimony, turmeric, cardamom, pepper, etc. They brought cocos, mangoes, medicinal plants, fruits, onions, sugarcane, flowers, arecanut, bananas, baby tigers, lions, elephants, monkeys, bear, deer, musk deer, fox, peacocks, musk cat, wild cocks, speaking parrots, etc. Okay. Figure 2.5, you can see this sandstone sculpture of Kushana king. Okay, it's a headless figure. Okay, in practice, in praise of Samudragupta. This is an excerpt from the Prayaga Prashasti. He was without an antagonist on earth. He, by the overflowing of the multitude of his many good qualities and adorned by hundreds of good actions, has wiped off the fame of other kings with the soles of his feet. Purusha, the supreme being the cause of prosperity. Purusha means the supreme god, supreme being the cause of the prosperity of the good and the destruction of the bad. Incomprehensible. He is okay. He is one of the one whose tender heart can be captured only by devotion and humility. He is possessed of compassion. He is the giver of many hundred thousands of cows. His mind has received ceremonial initiation for the uplift of miserable, the poor, forlorn, and suffering. He is represented and embodied kindness to mankind. He is equal to the gods: Kubera, the god of wealth; Varuna, the god of ocean; Indra, the god of rains; and Yama, the god of death. 5. A changing countryside. A changing countryside. Popular perceptions of kings. Popular perceptions of kings. What subjects think about their rulers? What did subjects think about their rulers? Obviously, inscriptions do not provide all the answers. In fact, ordinary people rarely left accounts of their thoughts and experiences. Nevertheless, the historians have tried to solve this problem by examining Jataka stories contained in anthologies such as the Jatakas and Panchatantra. Many of these stories probably originated as a as popular oral tales that were later committed to writing. Nevertheless, historians have tried to solve this problem by examining stories contained in the anthologies such as the Jatakas and Panchatantra. Many of these stories probably originated as popular oral tales that were that were later committed to writing. The Jatakas were written in Pali around the middle of the first millennium CE. One story known as Gan, Ganda Ganda Tindu Ganda Tindu Jadaga. One story known as Ganda Tindu Jadaga describes the plight of the subjects of a wicked king. These included elderly women and men, cultivators, herders, village boys, and even animals. When the king went in disguise to find out what his subjects thought about him, each one of them cursed him for their mysteries, complaining that they were attacked by robbers at night and by tax collectors during the day. To escape from this situation, people abandoned their village and went to live in the forest. As this story indicates, the relationship between a king and his subjects, especially the rural population, could often be strained. Kings frequently tried to fill their coffers by demanding high taxes, and peasants particularly found such demands oppressive. Escaping into the forest remained an option, as reflected in the Jataka story. Meanwhile, other strategies aimed at increasing production to meet growing demand for taxes also came to be adopted. Okay, the Sudarshana Lake in Gujarat. Sudarshana Lake in Gujarat. Okay, find Girnar on map 2. The Sudarshana Lake was an artificial reservoir. We know about it from rock inscriptions circa 2nd century CE in Sanskrit, composed to record the achievements of the Shaga ruler Rudradaman. Shaga ruler is Rudradaman. The inscriptions mentions that the lake with embankments and water channels was built by a local governor during the rule of Mauryas. However, a terrible storm broke the embankments and water gushed out of the lake. Rudradaman, who was then ruling in the area, claimed to have got the lake repaired using his own resources without imposing any tax on his subjects. Another inscription on the same rock, circa 5th century, mentions how one of the rulers of the Gupta dynasty got the lake repaired once again. Okay. Transplantation is used for paddy cultivation in areas where water is plentiful. Here, seeds are the first broadcast. When the saplings have grown, they are transplanted in waterlogged fields. This ensures a higher ratio of survival of saplings and higher yields. Okay, strategies for increasing production. Strategies for increasing production. One such strategy was the shift to plow agriculture, which spread in fertile alluvial river valleys such as those of the Ganga and Kaveri from circa 6th century BCE. The iron-tipped plowshare was used to turn the alluvial soil in areas which had high rainfall. However, in some parts of the Ganga Valley, production of paddy was dramatically increased by the introduction of transplantation, although this meant back-breaking work for the producer. While the iron plowshare led to a growth in agricultural productivity, its use was restricted to certain parts of the subcontinent. Cultivators in areas which were semi-arid, such as the parts of Punjab and Rajasthan, did not adopt it till the 20th century, and those living in hilly tracts in the northeastern and central parts of the subcontinent practiced hoe agriculture, which was much better suited to the terrain. Another strategy adopted to increase agricultural production was the use of irrigation through wells and tanks, and less commonly canals. Communities as well as individuals organized the construction of irrigation works. This later usually powerful men, including kings, often recorded such activities in inscriptions. Next is differences in rural society. differences in rural society. While these technologies often led to an increase in production, the benefits were very uneven. What is evident is that there was a strong differentiation amongst people engaged in agriculture. Stories, especially within the Buddhist tradition, refer to landless agricultural laborers, small peasants, as well as large landholders. The term Gahapadi was often used in Pali texts to designate the second and third categories. The large landholders, as well as village headmen, whose position was often hereditary, emerged as powerful figures and often exercised control over other cultivators. Early Tamil literature, the Sangam text also mentions different categories of people living in the villages: large landowners or vellalar, plowmen or udavar, and slaves or adime. Landowners are called vellalar, plowman or udavar, and slaves are adime. It is likely that these differences were based on differential access to land, uh, labor, and some of the new technologies. In such a situation, questions of uh, control over land must have become crucial, as these were often discussed in legal texts. The importance of boundaries. Manusmriti. The Manusmriti is one of the best known legal texts of early India, written in Sanskrit and compiled between circa 2nd century BCE to circa 2nd century CE. This is what the text advises the king to do, saying that in the world controversies constantly arise due to the ignorance of boundaries. He should have concealed boundary markers buried, stones, bones, cows' hair, chaff, ashes, potsherds, herds, dried cow dung, bricks, coal, pebbles, and sand. He should also have other similar substances that would not decay in the soil, buried as hidden markers at the intersection of boundaries. Okay, what is Gahapadi? A Gahapati was the owner, master, or head of a household who exercised control over the women, children, slaves, and workers who shared a common residence. He was the owner of the resources, land, animals, and other things that belonged to the household. Sometimes the team was used as a marker for the status for men belonging to urban elite, including wealthy merchants. Okay. Last, fifth 5.4, land grants and new rural elites. From the early centuries of the Common Era, we find grants of land being made, which of many of which were recorded in inscriptions. Some of these inscriptions were on stone, but most were on copper plates, which were probably given as a record of transaction to those who received the land. The records have survived are generally about grants to religion institutions or to brahmanas. Most inscriptions were in Sanskrit in some cases, and especially from the 7th century onwards, part of the inscription was in Sanskrit, while the rest was in use in a local language. Rest was in local language such as Tamil or Telugu. Let us look at the one such inscription more closely. Okay, Prabhavati Gupta was the daughter of one of the most important rulers in the early Indian history, Chandragupta II, circa 375 to 415 CE. She was married into another important ruling family, that of the Vakadagas, who were powerful in Deccan. According to the Sanskrit text, women were not supposed to have independent access to resources such as land. However, the inscription indicates that Prabhavati had access to land, which she then granted. This may have been because she was a queen, one of the few known from early Indian history. And her situation was therefore exceptional. It is also possible that the provisions of legal texts were not uniformly implemented. The inscription also gives us an idea about rural populations. Okay, these included Brahmanas and provide Kshatriyas. Okay, the inscriptions also gives us an idea about rural populations. These included Brahmanas and peasants as well as others who were expected to provide a range of produce to the king or his representatives. And according to the inscription, they would have to obey the new lord of the village and perhaps pay him all these dues. Land grants such as this one have been found in several parts of the country. There were regional variations in the sizes of land donated, ranging from small plots to vast stretches of uncultivated land, and the rights given to Donis, the recipients of the grant. The impact of the land grants is a subject of heated debate among historians. Some feel that the land grant were part of strategy adopted by ruling lineages to extend agriculture to new areas. Others suggest that land grants were indicative of weakening political power, as kings were losing control over their samandas. They tried to win allies by making grants of land. They also feel that the kings tried to project themselves as Superman, as we saw in the previous section, because they were losing control. They wanted to present at least a facade of power. Okay, life in small village. The Harsha Charita is a biography of Harsha Vardhana, the ruler of Kanauj. Harsha Charita is the biography of Harsha Vardhana, the ruler of Kanauj, composed in Sanskrit by his court poet Bana Bhatta. So, who composed Harsha Charita? It is Bana Bhatta. Okay, circa 7th century CE. This is an excerpt from the text, an extremely rare representation of life in a settlement on the outskirts of a forest in the Vindhyas. The outskirts being, for the most part, forest. Many parcels of rice land, threshing ground, and arable land were being apportioned by small farmers. It was mainly spade culture, owing to the difficulty of plowing the sparsely scattered fields covered with grass, with their few clear spaces, their black soil stiff as black iron. There were people moving along with the bundles of bark, countless sacks of plucked flowers, loads of flax and hemp bundles, quantities of honey, peacock's tail, feathers, wreaths of wax, logs and grass. Village wives hastened en route for neighboring villages, all intent on thoughts of sale and bearing on their heads baskets filled with various gathered forest fruits. Okay. Prabhavati Gupta and the village of Dangona. Dangona, Prabhavati Gupta and the village of Dangona. That is what Prabhavati Gupta states in her inscription. Prabhavati Gupta commands the Grama Kudumbinas, which are householders, peasants living in the village, Brahmanas and other living in the village of Danguna. Be it known to you that on the 12th lunar day of the bright fortnight of Kartiga, we have, in order to increase our releases merit, donated this village with the pouring out of water to the Acharya teacher Chanala Chanala Swamin. You should obey all his commands. We conquer on him the following exemptions typical of an Agrahara. This village is not to be entered by soldiers and policemen. It is an exempt from the obligation to provide grass, animal hides as seeds, and charcoal to touring control royal officers, exempt from the royal prerogative of purchasing fermenting liquors and digging salt, exempt from the right to mines and kadira trees, exempt from the obligation to supply flowers and milk. It is donated together with the right to hidden treasures and deposits, and together with major and minor taxes. The charter that has been written in the 13th year, it has been engraved by Chakradasha. Okay. An agrahara was land granted to a brahmana who was usually exempted from paying land revenue and other dues to the king, and was often given the right to collect these dues from the local people. Agrahara. Okay. Land grants provide some insight into the relationship between cultivators and the state. However, there were people who were often beyond the reach of officials or samandas. Okay, pastoralists, fisher folk, and hunter gatherers, mobile or semi-sedentary, artisan and mobile and shifting cultivators. Generally, such groups did not keep detailed records on their lives and transactions. Okay, towns and trade. 6.1 New cities. Let us retrace our steps back into the urban centers that emerged in several parts of the subcontinent from circa 6th century to BCE, 6th century BCE. As we have seen, many of these were capitals of Mahajanapadas. Virtually all major towns were located along routes of communication. Some, such as the Patliputra, were on riverine routes. Others, such as Ujjaini, were along the land routes, and yet others, such as Puhar, were near the coast, where sea routes began. Many cities like Madura were bustling centers of commercial, cultural, and political activity. Okay, the history of Padliputra. Each city had a history of its own. Padliputra, for instance, began as a village known as Patli Grama. Then, in the 5th century BC, the Magadhan rulers decided to shift their capital from Rajagriha to this settlement and renamed it. By the 4th century BCE, it was the capital of Mauryan Empire and one of the largest cities in Asia. Subsequently, the importance apparently declined. When the Chinese pilgrim Zhuan Sang visited the city in 7th century CE, he found it, it in ruins and with a very small population. Okay, urban populations, elites and craft persons. Urban population, elites and craft persons. We have seen that kings and ruling elites lived in fortified cities. Although it is difficult to conduct extensive excavations at most sites because people live in these areas even today, unlike the Harappan cities, a wide range of artifacts have been recovered from them. These include fine pottery bowls, and dishes with a glossy finish known as the Northern Black Polished Ware (NBPW), Northern Black Polished Ware, probably used by rich people, and ornaments, tools, weapons, vessels, figurines made of a wide range of materials: gold, silver, copper, bronze, ivory, glass, shell, and terracotta. Okay, the gift. Here we can see a gift. Here we can see a figure. Okay, it is the gift of an image. This is the part of an image from Mathura. On the pedestal is on the pedestal is Prakrut inscription mentioning that women named Nagapiya, the wife of goldsmith Sovanika, named Dharmiga, installed this image in a shrine. Okay, some important kingdoms and towns. Chola Chera Pandyas, Kodumanai, Puhar, Danya Kadaga, Shadavanas, Paitan, Sopara, Baru, Kecha, Shagas, Vagadas, Ujjaini, Vidisha, Kaushambi, Varanasi, Guptas, Shravasti, Kanauj Manohar, sorry, Kanauj Mathura. Then Vaishali, Patliputra, Rajgir, Mahastan, Chandra Kedugar, Shishupalgar. Okay, right side is West of Bengal, Bay of Bengal, and left side is Arabian Sea. Okay, by the 2nd century BCE, We find short votive inscriptions in a number of cities. These mention the name of the donor and sometimes specify his or her occupation as well. They they tell us about uh, people who lived in towns, washing folk, weavers, scribes, carpenters, potters, goldsmiths, and blacksmiths officials, religious teachers, merchants, and kings. Okay, sometimes guides or trainees organizations of craft producers and merchants are mentioned as well. Okay, washing folk, weavers, scribes, carpenters, potteries, goldsmiths and blacksmiths, officials, religious teachers, merchants, and kings. Okay, sometimes the guilds or trainees organizations of craft producers and merchants are mentioned as well. These guidelines probably procured raw materials, regulated production, and they marketed the finished product. It is likely to meet it is likely to meet the growing demand of urban center. Like a Freud. Okay. It is likely that a craft person used a wide range of iron tools to meet the growing demands of urban elites. Votive inscriptions shows records gifts made to religious institutions. Votive inscriptions record gift made to religious institutions. Trade in the subcontinent. Trade in the subcontinent and beyond. Trade in the subcontinent and beyond. trade in Trade in the subcontinent and beyond. From the 6th century BCE, land and river routes crisscrossed the subcontinent and extended in various directions overland into Central Asia and beyond, and overseas, from ports that dotted the coastline, extending across the Arabian Sea to East and North Africa and West Asia, and through the Bay of Bengal to Southeast Asia and China. Rulers often attempted to control these routes, possibly by offering protection for a price. Those who traversed these routes included peddlers who probably traveled on foot and merchants who traveled with caravans of bullock carts and pack animals. Also, there were seafarers whose ventures were risky but highly profitable. Successful merchants designated as Masattuvan in Tamil, and Setis and Shadavahas in Prakriti could become enormously rich. A wide range of goods were carried from one place to another: salt, grain, cloth, metal ores, and finished products, stone, timber, medicinal plants, to name a few. Spice, especially pepper, were in high demand in the Roman Empire, as were textiles and medicinal plants, and these were all transported across the Arabian Sea to the Mediterranean. Coins and kings. To some extent, exchanges were facilitated by the introduction of coinage. Punch marked coins. Punch marked coins made of silver and copper. Punch marked coins made of silver and copper, 6th century BCE onwards, were amongst the earliest to be minted and used. These have been recovered from excavations at a number of sites throughout the subcontinent. Numismatics have studied these and other coins to reconstruct possible commercial networks. Attempts made to identify the symbols on punch-marked coins with specific ruling dynasties, including the Mauryas, suggest that these were issued by kings. It is also likely that merchants, bankers, and townspeople issued some of these coins. The first coins to bear the names and images of rulers were issued by the Indo-Greeks, who established control over the northwestern part of the subcontinent, circa 2nd century BCE. The first gold coins were issued circa 1st century CE by the Kushanas. These were virtually identical in weight with those issued by contemporary Roman emperors, and the Parthian rulers of Iran, and have been found from several sites in North India and Central Asia. The widespread use of gold coins indicates the enormous value of this transaction that were taking place. Besides, hordes of Roman coins have been found from archaeological sites in South India. It is obvious that networks of trade were not confined within political boundaries. South India was not part of the Roman Empire, but there were close connections through trade. Coins were also issued by tribal republics such as that of the Yodhayas of Punjab and Haryana circa 1st century CE. Archaeologists have unearthed several thousand copper coins issued by Yodhayas, pointing to the latter's interest and participation in economic exchanges. Some of the most spectacular gold coins were issued by Gupta rulers. The earliest issues are remarkable for their purity. These coins facilitated long distance transactions from which kings also benefited. From circa 6th century CE onwards, finds of gold coins taper off. Does this indicate that there was some kind of economic crisis? Historians are divided on this issue. Some suggest that with the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, long distance trade declined, and this affected the prosperity of the states, communities, and regions that had benefited from it. Others argue that new towns and networks of trade started emerging around this time. They also point out that though finds of coins of that time are fewer, coins continue to be mentioned in inscriptions and texts. Could it be that there are fewer finds because coins were in circulation rather than being hoarded? Okay, a Gupta coin. These are this is a figure of Gupta coin. Okay, this is a figure of Yaudaya coin. Okay, this is a figure of punch marked coin, so named because symbols were punched or stamped onto the metal surface. Okay, numismatics is the study of coins, including visual elements such as scripts and images, metallurgical analysis, and contexts in which they have been found. Okay, the Malabar coast, present day Kerala. Here is an excerpt from Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, composed by an anonymous Greek sailor, circa 1st century CE. That is, traders from abroad, sent large ships to these market towns on account of the great quantity and bulk of pepper and malabatram, possibly cinnamon, produced in these regions. Okay, there are imported here in the first place a great quantity of coin, topaz, antimony, a mineral used as a coloring substance, coral, crude glass, copper, tin, lead. There is exported pepper, which is produced in quantity in only one region near these markets. Besides this, there are exported great quantities of fine pearls, ivory, silk cloth, transparent stones of all kinds, diamonds and sapphires, and tortoise shell. Archaeological evidence of a bead making industry using precious and semi-precious stones has been found in Kodumanal, Tamil Nadu. It is likely that local traders brought the stones mentioned in the periplus from sites such as these to the coastal ports. Okay. Periplus is a Greek word meaning sailing around the Erythraean, was the Greek name for the Red Sea. Okay. Periplus is a Greek word meaning sailing around, and Erythraean was the Greek name for the Red Sea. Okay. Figure 2.10, an Ashokan inscription. You can see an Ashokan inscription here. Okay. This is an Ashokan Brahmi with Devanagari equivalents. Okay. Back to basics. How are inscriptions deciphered? So far, we have been studying excerpts from the inscriptions amongst other things. But how do historians find out what is written on them? Deciphering Brahmi. Most scripts used to write modern Indian languages are derived from Brahmi, the script used in most Ashokan inscriptions. From the late 18th century, European scholars, aided by Indian Pandits, worked backwards from contemporary Bengali and Devanagari, the script used to write Hindi manuscripts, comparing their letters with older specimens. Scholars who studied early inscriptions sometimes assumed these were in Sanskrit, although the earliest inscriptions were in fact in Prakrit. It was only after decades of painstaking investigations by several epigraphists that James Prinsep was able to decipher Ashokan Brahmi in 1838. How Garoshti was read. The story of the decipherment of Kharoshthi, the script used in inscriptions in the northwest, is different. Here, finds of coin of Indo-Greek kings who ruled over the area circa 2nd 1st century BCE have facilitated matters. These coins contain the names of kings written in Greek and Kharoshthi scripts. European scholars who could read the former compared the letters. For instance, the symbol for A could be found in both scripts for writing, such as writing names, such as Apollo daughters, with Prinsep identifying the language of the Kharoshthi inscriptions as Prakrit. It became possible to read longer inscriptions as well. Historical evidence from inscriptions. To find out how epigraphists and historians work, let us look at two Ashokan inscriptions more closely. Note that the name of the ruler, Ashoka, is not mentioned in the inscription. What is used instead are titles adopted by the ruler, Devanam Piya, often translated as beloved of the gods, and Piyadasi, or pleasant to behold. The name Ashoka is mentioned in some other inscriptions, which also contain these titles. After examining all these inscriptions and finding that they match in terms of content, a style, language, and paleography, epigraphists have concluded that they were issued by the same ruler. You may also have noticed that Ashoka claims that earlier rulers had no arrangements to receive reports. If you consider the political history of the subcontinent prior to Ashoka, do you think this statement is true? Historians have to constantly assess the statements made in inscriptions to judge whether they are true, plausible, or exaggerations. Did you notice that there are words within brackets? Epigraphists sometimes add these to make the meaning of sentence clear. This has to be done carefully to ensure that the intended meaning of the author is not changed. Okay, the orders of the king. Thus speaks King Devanam Piya Piyadashi. In the past, there were no arrangements for disposing affairs, nor for receiving regular reports. But I have made the following arrangement. Patti Vedagas should report to me about the affairs of the people at all times, anywhere, whether I am eating, in the inner apartment, in the bedroom, in the cow pen, being carried, possibly in a palanquin, or in the garden, and I will dispose of the affairs of the people everywhere. Okay. Epigraphists have translated the term Patti Vedaga as reporter. Patti Vedaga, reporter. In what ways would the function of the Patti Vedaga have been different from those we generally associate with reporters today? Okay, here we can see a coin of the Indo-Greek king Menander. Okay. Historians have to make other assessments as well. If a king's order were inscribed on natural rocks near cities or important routes of communication, would passers-by have stopped to read this? Most people were probably not literate. Did everybody throughout the subcontinent understand the Prakrit used in Patliputra? Would the orders of the king have been followed? Answers to such questions are not always easy to find. Some of these problems are evident if we look at an Ashokan inscription, which has often been interpreted as reflecting the anguish of the ruler, as well as marking a change in his attitude towards warfare. As we shall see the situation becomes more complex once we move beyond reading the inscription at face value. While Ashokan inscriptions have been found in present day Orissa, the one depicting his anguish is missing. In other words, the inscriptions has not been found in the region that was conquered. What are we to make of that? Is it that the anguish of the recent conquest was too painful in the region and therefore the ruler was unable to address the issue? The limitations of inscriptional evidence. By now, it is probably evident that there are limits to what epigraphy can reveal. Sometimes there are technical limitations. Letters are very faintly engraved, and thus reconstructions are uncertain. Also, inscriptions may be damaged or letters missing. Besides, it is not always easy to be sure about the exact meaning of the words used in the inscriptions, some of which may be specific to a particular place or time. If you go through an epigraphical journal, you will realize that scholars are constantly debating and discussing alternative ways of reading inscriptions. Although several thousand inscriptions have been discovered, not all have been deciphered, published, and translated. Besides, many more inscriptions must have existed, which have not survived the ravages of time. So, what is available at present is probably only a fraction of what was inscribed. There is another, perhaps more fundamental problem. Not everything that we may consider politically or economically significant was necessarily recorded in inscriptions. For instance, routine agricultural practices and the joys and sorrows of daily existence find no mention in inscriptions, which focus more often than not on grand, unique events. Besides, the content of inscriptions almost invariably projects the perspective of the persons who commissioned them. As such, they need to be juxtaposed with other perspectives as to arrive at a better understanding of the past. Okay. The anguish of the king. When the king Devanam Piyadashi had been ruling for 8 years, the country of the Kalingas, present day coastal Orissa, was conquered by him. 150,000 men were deported. 100,000 were killed, and many more died. After that, now that the country of the Kalingas has been taken, Devanampiya is devoted to an intense study of Dhamma, to the love of Dhamma, and to instructing the people in Dhamma. This is the repentance of Devanampiya on account of his conquest of the Kalingas. For this is considered very painful and deplorable by Devanampiya that while one is conquering an unconquered country, slaughter, death, and deportation of people takes place there. Okay, the limitation of inscriptional evidence. Okay, we have discussed it. Thus, epigraphy alone does not provide a full understanding of political and economic history. Also, historians often question both old and new evidences. Scholars in the late 19th and early 20th centuries were primarily interested in the histories of kings. From the mid 20th century onwards, issues such as economic change and the ways in which different social groups emerged have assumed far more importance. Recent decades have been a much greater preoccupation with histories of marginalized groups. This will probably lead to fresh investigations of old sources and the development of new strategies of analysis. Okay, figure 2.13, a copper plate inscription from the Karnataka, circa 6th century CE. You can see them here. Timeline 1, major political and economic developments. Circa 600 to 500 BCE, paddy transplantation, urbanization in the Ganga Valley, Mahajanapadas, punch-marked coins. 500 to 400 BCE, rulers of Magadha consolidate power. Okay, 327 to 325 BCE, invasion of Alexander of Macedon. 321 BCE, accession of Chandragupta Maurya. 272 or 268 to 231 BCE, reign of Ashoka. 185 BCE, end of Mauryan Empire. 200 to 100 BCE, Indo-Greek rule in the northwest. Cholas, Cheras, and Pandyas in South India. Shatavahanas in the Deccan. 100 BCE to 200 BCE. 100 BCE to 200 CE. Shaga, people from Central Asia rulers in the northwest. Roman trade, gold coinage. 78 CE. Accession of Kanishka. 100 to 200 CE. Earliest inscriptional evidence of land grants by Shatavahana and Shaga rulers. 320 CE, beginning of Gupta rule. 335 to 375 CE, Samudragupta. 375 to 415 CE, Chandragupta II, Vagadagas in the Deccan. 500 to 600 CE, rise of the Chalukyas in Karnataka and of the Pallavas in Tamil Nadu. 606 to 647 CE, Harshavardhana, king of Kanauj. Chinese pilgrim Xuanzang comes in search of Buddhist texts. 712 C 712 Arabs conquer Sindh. Okay, it is difficult to date economic developments precisely. Also, there are enormous subcontinental variations which have not been indicated in the timeline. Only the earliest dates for specific developments have been given. The date of Kanishka's accession is not certain, and this has been marked with a. Okay. Timeline 2, major advancements in epigraphy. 18th century, 1784, founding of the Asiatic Society, Bengal, which is year 1784, 1784, 1784. 19th century, 1810s, Colin Mackenzie collects over 8,000 inscriptions in Sanskrit and Dravidian languages. 1838, decipherment of Ashokan Brahmi by James Prinsep. 1877, Alexander Cunningham publishes a set of Ashokan inscriptions. 1886, first issue of Epigraphia Carnatica, a journal of South Indian inscriptions. 1888, first issue of Epigraphia Indica. Okay, 20th century, 1965 to 66, D.C. Sirkar publishes Indian Epigraphy and Indian Epigraphical Glossary. Okay, here we have completed the chapter theme 2. Next we will discuss theme 3, kingship, caste and class, early societies, circa 600 BCE to 600 CE. In the next class, thank you very much for listening me.